playing for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's
go. 2 weeks to pay dirt. That's the way I'm looking at this right now. Pitchers and catchers report essentially the same weekend. College baseball is a full go, big time college baseball. And you know what that means. Oh, hey, look, it's you. How you doing? Welcome to the FSS Plus podcast. Joe Doyle is here. I'm Jason Churchill. Lots going on in the baseball world. We have a trade to talk about, and we're going to do that. Did that one catch you by surprise, Mr. Doyle, by the way, just right out of the gate here? It seemed really obvious that Baltimore was a team that probably should have been out there trying to find a Dylan Cease or a Blake Snell or a Jordan Montgomery or a Corbin Burnes, but it did kind of come out of nowhere. We didn't hear any rumors, and then boom, here it is. It's done.
I would say the industry has been kind of broadcasting the fact that Baltimore's they have to make a deal. Like, you have too much ammunition, you have an excess of ammunition. You need starting pitching. I think maybe the interesting part was, maybe the White Sox overplayed their hand a little bit with the Dylan Cease situation. And I would think the way Baltimore operates that, maybe Dylan Cease is off the board now.
Yeah.
That was, I think, the only interesting part of it was maybe Chicago kind of overplayed this whole thing and Corbin Burnes became the better value.
Yeah, interesting. It's 2 years of Cease, 1 year of Burnes, so that is a little bit different. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. Also, apart from Baltimore's angle, Milwaukee's angle, there's a free agent pitching angle to the Corbin Burnes trade and the Dylan Cease trade talks and all those rumors going around. So we'll dig into that as well. Blake Snell still out there. Jordan Montgomery still out there. We got to talk about it until they sign, because I wouldn't say we're running out of time, but they're kind of running out of time unless they want to miss camp. So we'll dig into that a little bit as well. It's draft season, of course. So we'll check in with Joe on the 2024 class. We'll do that all year long, of course. But in this episode, I want to pick your brain, Joe, on which prospects have improved their stock the most this offseason. I mean, nobody's played any actual real games since May or June. Your first board of the offseason was September, I believe it was, at the end of September. So what's changed between now or then and now with some of these top prospects? That's what I want to get from you. We'll dig into that as well. We'll add some insight to the bats in the draft class. A piece you wrote, Joe. It's at futurestarseries.com right now. Fastball. I think you used the word murderers, which is just an amazing
it's a good word
to use.
It's a good hard word.
Yeah, so they kill the fastball, and that's always interesting. So we'll talk about that as well. Joe does have his top 30s coming out in the next couple of weeks, so look for those at futurestarseries.com. That's team by team top 30s and a top 100. And I've had a sneak peek at some of these. It's really interesting, and it's not the same thing you've seen across the industry the past month or so. These are a little bit different, I would say, is probably a good way to put it. It's not like you have Jackson Holiday ranked 23rd, Joe, but there's always differences because he's not even a top 50 guy for you. That would be.
You won't find his name on here. I'm not a fan of the Holiday family. Keep him out. And Ethan's going to fall on my 25 board too.
Or as I would put it, there are at least 100 prospects in baseball better than Jackson Holiday. For some reason, I just like to word things that way. I have no idea why I did it again last week. All right. So we'll do that. Every week we're going to have something draft related here on the show because, it's kind of what Joe lives for. If we don't talk about the draft, Joe complains for like 6-7 days afterward.
I used those exact same words, Jason, with my wife. I said, I live for baseball. And she didn't like that.
She didn't like it. Yeah, I would.
No.
I would think.
Coming up on our anniversary, she said, "That's great, sweetheart."
I'm just gonna let that sit for a second. So here's what's great. If we were if we were at a commercial radio station and we had a producer and engineer and all that, that would be a drop for the next 4 years. You
Yeah,
saying that,
that's great,
it would be a
sweetheart.
drop. We would use yes, we would use that constantly. All right, I want to get to Blake Snell, Joe, but let's talk about the big trade first, because I think that's going to impact to some extent Snell's suitors and the overall market. The Baltimore Orioles have acquired right-hander Corbin Burnes from the Milwaukee Brewers in exchange for left-hander DL Hall, infield prospect Joey Ortiz, and the number 34 overall pick in the 2024 draft. Now, that was the pick the O's were awarded in the competitive balance process. You can trade those picks, remember. Just to do some quick due diligence on those players, Joe, Hall is 25. He was a first rounder in 2017. He struggled throwing strikes, was moved to the bullpen, I believe it was 2 years ago, 2022 by the O's. I suppose, though, here, Joe, that the Brewers could say, hey, he's only 25. He was just moved to the bullpen 2 years ago. And while, yes, we like his potential in the pen, they could reevaluate in Milwaukee and say, let's give him another shot at starting. They might have an idea or two that helps him throw strikes a little bit more. That could be part of the plan here, because the stuff is not the issue with DL Hall. Am I right?
I mean, yeah, but if you rewind that tape and you say he's only 20, like he's 25, that's not a young prospect. That's a guy that's about to graduate next year, regardless of
True.
whatever happens this year, whether or not he gets any time at the big league club. So, listen, I think some people want to see whether or not this guy can be Jesus Luzardo. Some people want to see, maybe they think he's Josh Hader. That kind of brings back shades of Josh Hader. I personally think he's going to end up being something of an AJ Puck, which is fine. I mean, that's a valuable player. It's an eighth inning guy. We've got him a role 5 guy, just a solid contributor on a division winning team. And you'll see roles for every player on the top 30 when our boards release next week. I think that's been something that has kind of delayed the push out of those. We want to make sure that we're kind of nailing down how we're projecting these guys out. But with DL Hall, it's like, where's the strike throwing ability? He's 25. That hasn't really taken a step in the right direction. I'm interested to see if they actually give him a shot to start. That was a ship that I thought sailed in 2021. Great arm. Just, you don't really know what you're going to get out of him.
Yeah, you got to have a plan for him if you're going to do that. I wouldn't rule it out. You can always go back. That's the thing, too. You can always go back to the relief part. I mean, it's not like he's been a reliever and you're going completely in the other direction. It's not like you're asking a first baseman to play shortstop here. 25 years old, we'll see. Ortiz is also 25, made his big league debut this past season, got a cup of coffee, didn't do a whole lot, but it was a small sample. And from what I can gather, he's a guy who there's really no doubt he can play shortstop. He runs well, makes contact, projects to hit for average, probably firmly below average power. Is there anything there that's missing? I think it's a really interesting get, and I'll get to that in a second, but what else you got on Ortiz?
I think I've cooled a little bit on Ortiz over the last year. The bumps and bruises and the nagging injuries and missing time here and there. And, he's been challenged with actually staying on the dirt, staying healthy. You combine that with the fact that he's probably settled in now as a utility player going forward. Listen, maybe Milwaukee has plans for Joey Ortiz if and when Willy Adames isn't with the team in 2025. I think that's a totally reasonable possibility. He hasn't shown the ability to stay on the field playing the 6. And when you tell me that he's not a surefire shortstop, there's durability issues, it's probably 3 game power. I don't know. I mean, I want to say he's probably a role 45 rover utility type who provides a lot of value, but never really impacts the big league ball club. Like I think you'd like to see him do that.
If you were the Brewers here and you mentioned Willy Adames, with Ortiz on the roster, even if you think he's just a fringe regular, with Terang on the roster, and with where you are in your process as the Brewers, they obviously moved Burnes. Woodruff is gone. They let some other guys go, some other smaller pieces go. This is obviously a team in transition. The writing's been on the wall for months that Adames is not going to be here long term. This may give them the opportunity to literally start the season without Willy Adames on the roster. Didn't have a great year So it may behoove them to, let's see if he can have a couple of strong months before we put him back out there on the market. But I gotta think that if there's a contender out there that has a need at shortstop, like that's a guy you might be able to go get now that Milwaukee's made the deal they have.
I mean, even if it's a team that doesn't have a need at shortstop, I've got a team that has a need for impact at second base, or kind of have
Even
different
third.
fringy options. Yeah, I mean, even fringy options at third base, like the offensive profile can play at third base, no problem. Um, I would be surprised if they didn't at least float him for the next month, or for the next 3 weeks while we approach spring training. But then again, while Milwaukee has always kind of trimmed the fat in terms of getting rid of some pieces to extend the window, they've also been a team that has put a lot of priority in extending the window. And I think Willie Adames, especially in the NL Central, that has gotten a little bit better with the Reds. And I think the Cubs are going to end up landing Cody Bellinger at some point here. You want to give yourself the best chance to succeed in that division. And I would just be surprised if they moved Adames at this point, because it does make the margins razor thin to stay competitive.
Yeah. So one thing too about the Milwaukee Brewers, moving on from Adames, they have Devin Williams, one of the better relievers in Major League Baseball, and he's pretty unique. I mean, it's mid-90s, but it's an absolute nasty changeup. Doesn't really throw much else, but doesn't really need much else. They signed him to he's got basically a 2-year deal. He's got a $10.5 million club option for next year with a very small buyout. He's making $7 million in 2024 coming up here. That's a tradable commodity also that's going to have value. And I was talking to some folks earlier in the week, considering where Corbin Burnes is on the trend line, there's some folks out there that think Devin Williams might bring back more than Corbin Burnes did, which I thought was really interesting. I don't necessarily think they're crazy though. And if I'm Milwaukee, I'm absolutely shopping Devin Williams too. What would you give up for Devin Williams? If you're a club out there that needs a guy, if you're the Rangers, if you're the Angels, if you're the Twins that don't have a dominant bullpen with a couple of guys at the back end that can slam the door, what are you paying for Devin Williams? What is he worth? And maybe kind of tie that into what the Orioles paid to get Corbin Burnes a starter.
Yeah, without knowing how many years and dollars are left on the Devin Williams deal, I wish I could pull that up in front of me, or the producer
Yeah,
could.
it's 2 years. It's 2 years and $17.5 million. But next year's a club option. So if he's terrible or he gets hurt, it's a $250,000 buyout. It's a pretty safe deal. You'd pay him $7 million this year, and if things go well, he's probably going to be worth $10.5 million next year. So 2 and 17.5, or it's 1 and 7 plus a $250,000 buyout.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're always going to get more for a starting pitcher who posts innings than you would otherwise. Now, I look at it like this. Devin Williams has been one of the most dynamic relievers in baseball. 2.5 or 2.2 FWAR in 2022, 1.8 FWAR in 2023. I mean, that's significant for a reliever. You don't see those types of numbers. Corbin Burnes worth about 3.4, so still about double that. I think you could especially with the club option, I think you could probably get what you got, or something in the ballpark of what you got for Corbin Burnes. Maybe you don't get the comp A pick, but I think you could probably get a top 100 prospect and another top 150, top 200 type for Devin Williams. 2 years of an eighth inning guy, 2 years of a possible ninth inning guy who hasn't really shown any signs of slowing. I think, listen, we're in an era now in baseball, and it's been like this for a few years now, where I just think bullpens are the way teams are configuring to win baseball games. Nobody's scoring runs. It's a lot of home runs. There's not a lot of hit tool out there right now, even though it is kind of coming back a little bit. So I think they would pay a lot. My question for you though, Jason, I'll throw this back at you. The Brewers were reluctant for a long time to move Josh Hader because they felt he was a key piece. How long do they wait for Devin Williams?
Yeah, that's the thing. When you look at Josh Hader, like he did spend was it just the last year and a half in San Diego, I believe. This is about the time that they traded Devin Williams as well. So you got to think, if they move along the same timeline, And every player is a little bit different. They may be a little bit different, age wise and things like that. Maybe different concerns about their performance or their health. But yeah, this would be about the time that they probably started thinking about moving Hader, and they moved him at the deadline in the same year that we're about to enter with Devin Williams. But when you compare Devin Williams to Corbin Burnes, Burnes most likely is going to cover more innings because he's probably going to go $175. And, Williams is probably only over the next 2 years is only going to go maybe $120, $125. But for me, he has a chance to impact a lot of games, even though it's fewer innings. And I think Burnes is on the wrong trend line. Like right now, you can argue that Williams just had his best season, even though from a wins above replacement standpoint, he didn't. I'm big on win probability when it comes to relievers. I really like that number for relievers. It really matches the eye test and the feel test when you feel out a season and you watch relievers and you're like, dang, and then you look at win probability. So I'm really big on that. And he was huge in 2023, 29 years old. For me, I would value 2 years of Williams at least as much as I would value 1 year of Burnes. Now, if you change that starting pitcher and you told me that starting pitcher was 27, 28 years old and was trending up, I'd feel a lot differently. I'd absolutely feel it. Or if you told me it was Garrett Cole for 1 year, absolutely a lot differently. But because it's Burnes and I'm not necessarily buying vintage best of his career Corbin Burnes, I'm all over this Devin Williams idea. Yeah, I think I would want a pretty decent farm systems. I'd want 2 guys from their top, 8 or so that were pretty close to the big leagues. And then I probably want a 3rd guy from their top 15 or maybe even a big league player to come back. That's a guy who's going to help. I look at it this way, even teams that are not contending, Joe, when the player at hand, when the player in question, Devin Williams in this case, is not a free agent at the end of the year, it still makes sense for you to go get him. You could tell me the Washington Nationals they went and traded for Devin Williams. They gave up like a couple of prospects to do him. It could very well make a lot of sense for them to do that. In a lot of ways, it could not make sense for them to do that too. It could look very strange. But man, you get a guy like that who's pitching the way he's pitched for the last 4 or 5 years. You get him at the deadline and you get all these contenders salivating. You're going to get everything you gave up, 6 months before. You're going to get it all back. You're going to get all back at the deadline.
I would just wait until July.
And that might be the reason why Milwaukee waits as well. Absolutely. Just like they did with Hader. So but that's going to be interesting. There's really nobody there left in Milwaukee they need to protect that's making any money.
My thing, I think back to the Hader trade, and one of the biggest narratives around that trade was, well, they have Devin Williams to cover the 8th and 9th inning. They have. So I'm looking at this roster.
They're also trying to contend, though. It's a little different now. They're really not right now.
You think so? I don't know, man. Like,
who's
I'm not saying they're trying to overachieve. I'm not saying they're going to overachieve, but I still think they have some pieces to go out there and win 85, 86 games, and with a stroke of luck, touch 89 or 90.
85, 86 in the next 2 years? I'll buy that. I'm not buying 85
next year. Well, look at the division that they play in, man. I mean, it's not exactly a. Well, I mean,
it's Freddie Peralta, and then you got to go to Wade Miley and Joe Ross, man. Like that's not an 85 win team. Now maybe they go out and make moves that they haven't made. Maybe they sign Blake Snell. I don't know.
What about DL Hall?
Like right now,
no, but to my point,
that MLB has Colin Ray and Robert Gasser in their rotation. If that gives you any, Joe Ross is their number 3 starter right now. That's the problem. Otherwise, I'd be with you.
My thing is, it's like a bunch of, they're like the NL Central is like starving people that are cannibalizing. Like there's no alpha there. It's just a bunch of teams that are all hoping to kind of win 84 games. And, by a stroke of luck, if the Brewers win, if the Brewers take 8 of 13 from everybody in their division, they go 8-5 against the whole division. You're setting yourself up to win 86, 87 games. And Christian Yelich, but Christian Yelich has been trending back in the right direction, and he stayed a little bit more healthy last year. Adames could have a bounce back year. I love their outfield. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Garrett Mitchell. I hope that he comes back and the shoulder is full health. And Frelick is probably going to have a more comfortable year. And Joey Weimer is just a monster breakout candidate waiting to happen. My point is, they've got some pieces, and Tyler Black is right on the horizon. Brock Wilken could make his debut this year. They're right on the horizon of being able to put together, and maybe this is 2025, but they're on the horizon of being able to put together another competitive window. But my thing with Devin Williams moving is when they moved Josh Hader, they had Devin Williams.
Mhm.
I don't think you can put the same amount of confidence in Abner Uribe, who was, he throws 103, like it was tremendous last year.
I got the
I
perfect
don't know how they
response
close
to
out
that,
the end of the
to
year.
that concern. Because you're right. You're right. When you compare that, if you are trying to compete, you're probably not trading Williams unless you're not competing. So you get to the deadline. If you're not competing, sure, you might trade Williams. Gives you an opportunity to replace him over the offseason or work on guys. But I'm going to do the same thing you just did with DL Hall, man. Like DL Hall is the savior. Trade Devin Williams. You got DL Hall. He can start for you and he can relieve for you. It's
So
over
DL Hall is
Milwaukee's
he's the trump card in this conversation, huh?
Yeah. So really quickly, and we'll move on here, but if the Brewers hadn't signed Rhys Hoskins, because that's the
Forgot
only
about Hoskins.
significant addition they've made. I mean, they're this offseason, everything else has been players going out. Like, if I took that away, I mean, this still might be the worst team in the division. It might be.
You really think
Might be the
so,
worst team in the division. It could be. I'm not saying that it definitely is. I'm saying it could still be the worst team just because of that pitching staff. Freddie Peralta, Wade Miley, and Joe Ross. Like, man. Like, at least the Reds went out and did a bunch of
Wade
stuff,
Miley
right?
has been a serviceable. Wade Miley has at
Sure he has.
times
He's
been
been
a
serviceable. He's your
four.
second best guy, though. He's your second best guy, and he should be your 5. Right? Like,
Maybe
that's
it's not
gonna
24. Maybe the brighter days are the second half of 24 and 25 when you have Gasser and Mizurowski coming up, and you have a predefined role for DL Hall. Like, maybe they have some question marks that they need to iron out here. I just don't like. I look at that lineup 1 through 9, and there's a lot of opportunity for breakout. And maybe pitching is not going to be their strong suit, but also kind of like Seattle. Like, I'm never going to count out the Milwaukee pitching staff. Like, they always post. It might not be electric like it was 3 years ago, but they always post. So
it's right now as it stands, it's definitely by far the worst rotation in the division. St. Louis went out and got guys, including Sonny Gray. Even if you look at that Reds with all the volatility in that Reds rotation, I would take that Reds rotation right now. Hunter Green coming back, Nick Lodolo, Ashcraft, Frankie Montas, Abbott, Brandon Williamson, Connor Phillips. I would take that group ahead of the current Brewers group right now.
I would too. I'm not saying there's a lot of upside in the Brewers rotation. Not right now.
And maybe they're going to make a deal or two. Maybe they were just like, we need to make sure Burnes is gone because maybe salary wise, they just didn't want to get stuck with having signed a guy and the guy that's only going to be here for a year. So maybe we see him make that. Anyway, that trade, Joe, I think we've talked about the Dylan Cease thing quite a bit. That trade, I think, I don't want to say it gave us a roadmap or gave us a blueprint, but it will give us an idea of what a year of about that good of a pitcher is going to cost you. Now, there are folks out there that are like, wow, if that's all Corbin Burnes is going to cost you, then you can get Devin Williams for a song and a half, which isn't true. And I think there's one aspect of this. Even if you like Joey Ortiz as about an average regular and you think DL Hall still has a chance to start, I think there's an aspect of that deal that maybe some folks are underrating, and that's the draft pick, the number 34 overall pick. Talk about that and how you're kind of thinking about that inclusion in the deal and the value of that, because that ultimately might end up being the most valuable piece to this deal for the Milwaukee Brewers moving forward.
I think it's gonna be the most valuable piece. If you just look at this from a player value perspective, Joey Ortiz was like a 4th round pick. DL Hall, I know, was a pretty high pick, but he's kind of stalled out a little bit as a reliever. You look at what the value of the 34th pick is in any draft. Last year, it was worth $2.5 million. $2.5 million can get you just about any high school player that's outside of the, say, top 5 or 6 high schoolers in any class. It can land you any college player that's on the board. Let's look at last year. And I know last year was a really good class, but some of the guys taken around 34, Josh Noth, who is one of the Brewers' top prospects, Charlie Soto, who's a top 5 or 6 prospect for the Twins, Thomas White, who's considered the top left-hander in the class in 2023, Kendall George, Kevin McGonigal. These are very high-profile high schoolers, and that's generally the range. That Comp A, that second pick, that's generally the range where teams stock up on high schoolers because there's always a run on them. So one thing about acquiring the Comp A pick is you're not acquiring a player, you're acquiring the player that you want to acquire. You're acquiring the player that you believe your player development system, which might I add, the Brewers player development system, one of the best in the game. They get a lot of value out of players that they develop. They can take whoever they want. And you look at some of the guys that are currently on the Future Stars board in that 30 to 35 range. You got Anthony Silva, Caleb Lomavita, Michael Massey, the right-hander from Wake Forest, Ben Hess, the right-hander from Alabama. If you're looking at high schoolers, number 30, the top high school pitcher on our board, Levi Sterling, Noah Franco, Joa Oki, Ryan Sloan. My point is, you can get a ton of value with that pick, and while you're probably not going to see that person play or pitch for the team until at least August of 2024, whoever they select with that pick will probably have a much, much higher ceiling than what Ortiz or DL Hall is going to provide the team in the long run. Really quickly, I'll end with this. I almost sent out a tweet yesterday, almost, and then I decided not to. Reflecting on this trade, like, Joey Ortiz probably doesn't have impact upside. DL Hall probably doesn't have impact foundational pillar upside.
Sure. Yep.
The number 34 pick could. Also, and you've mentioned this, the other side of it, Corbin Burnes has declined year over year over year, and he's still posting, solid number 3 starter numbers. And he's also owed $16 million.
Definitely a factor.
Definitely a factor. I think the thing that Twitter doesn't, there always has to be a winner. Everything I just said is true. I think it's a fine deal for both sides.
Yeah.
I don't know why Brewers fans thought that they could get some, organizational superstar out of this with 1 year of a guy who's owed $16 million. And on the flip side, the Orioles, I think Orioles fans are I think they're dreaming that Corbin Burnes is still a 1. And I don't personally see it unless he gets back on the horse.
Yeah, there's a tick or so since his 2021 season. He's lost a tick of fastball velocity. Maybe that's not a real thing, but in performance, all the runs allowed metrics, he lost a half a run or more from 21 to 22. He lost about a half a run, sometimes more, depending on which runs allowed metric you use. Going from 22 to 23. When you look at wins above replacement, he went from 7.5 to 4.6 to 3.4, despite still throwing 193 and 2/3 innings. There's a difference in performance there that's come down. He's still very good, and there's no reason why he can't bounce back a little bit and be better in 2024. But yeah, it's just 1 year. It's $16 million. There's some risk. It's a pitcher. I like the deal. I thought Baltimore did well. To be honest with you, if I'm Baltimore, here's what I was told before we went on the show, that they were talking players and Milwaukee was stuck on one of our favorite players, Joe, from that Orioles organization, and Mac Horvath, and Baltimore was like, we're not doing that. So it came down to, well, Horvath or 34, and they gave up 34. So I thought that was very, very interesting. They were trying to get arms too, the Seth Johnsons of the world, and that just, and Cade Povich, and that just wasn't flying. So they settled on Horvath, and then Baltimore backed off. And so they traded 34. Horvath, just in last year's draft, if I'm not mistaken, was the 53rd overall pick. So it seems the Brewers valued 34 and last year's 53rd overall pick relatively the same. So to give you an idea of like
Yeah.
maybe how much deeper last year's class was, but about how good the 34th pick is projected to be by at least one club. So that just goes to show the point you were making. There's a lot of good players to get, and player development these days is incredible. You can get, I mean, how many times have we seen guys? I mean, even over the years, Albert Pujols was what, like a 13th round pick or something like that. We've seen too much of that to kind of stick our nose up at the 34th overall pick. If I'm the Brewers, I'm happy with the deal. If I'm the Orioles, I'm happy with the deal, and that just should be it. Am I
Here's
crazy?
one
It
other
seems like
angle.
you agree. Mhm.
I mean, one other angle, look at it this way. Jacob Misiorowski is a top 30 prospect in the game in a lot of circles. He was the 63rd pick in that draft and in 2022, and he got 2.35 million as a JUCO guy, way over slot. But I mean, he's a tremendous example of the type of value that you can get. How about Tyler Black? How about Tyler Black was their comp A pick in 2021. He's now a top 100 prospect. He got 2.2 million. We'll go one more year just to show what the Brewers can do with some of these picks in the draft. Milwaukee Brewers. So 2020, they didn't have a comp A pick, but Joey Weimer, who is a staple in Milwaukee, was given $150,000 in the 4th round that year. So, I mean, here's my point. If you look at it like this, think of it as the Brewers got Joey Ortiz, DL Hall, and Jacob Misiorowski for Connor Burnes. Or think of it as Tyler Black, DL Hall, and Joey Ortiz for Corbin Burnes. That's a haul. And it's 18 control years of those guys for a guy that is going to make a lot of money this year for 1 year on the decline.
1 year. Yep. And it was going to cost you $25 million a year to keep, provided that he's healthy this year anyway. So yeah, there's that's the thing. The whole 1 year thing, that's really tough. That's really tough. That's why I think the Dylan Cease situation isn't necessarily clarified by the Corbin Burnes situation, because Dylan Cease does have 2 years left. And while he didn't have a great 2023, a lot of the metrics suggest like it was just right here. Like literally the curveball went south, or we're talking about the same exact guy from like every metric you can possibly pull up in Dylan Cease. So teams out there that are trying to get Dylan Cease or considering Dylan Cease, and the White Sox themselves are thinking, we still think this is the same guy from 2022, or at least close to it. And they're probably asking for 250% of what the Orioles gave up for Corbin Burnes. So I don't think it gave us clarity, but it does give us an idea of what a club will value of a similar pitcher for the 1 year. But when you're looking at that 2 years of control, and what's the big difference? You mentioned, what was it, $16 million Corbin Burnes is going to make, give or take?
Just about.
Well, yeah. Well, Dylan Cease isn't going to make that much in 2024. And that alone matters. Even though you get him for a second year, Dylan Cease's 2024 salary is different. With the 2 years of control left, he's got that extra year. He's making half of what Corbin Burnes is making this year. That matters. And I imagine that mattered to the Baltimore Orioles too, just not more than what the cost was going to be. So we'll see what happens with Dylan Cease. I think maybe a little light was shed on the cost for Dylan Cease, or what the cost should be for Dylan Cease, but not entirely. And it does suggest that Chicago White Sox are asking an awful lot for him. All right. Let's talk about free agency and how this may impact the Blake Snells of the world, and for that matter, Jordan Montgomery. When the offseason started, Joe, there were 3 main, like, proven starting pitchers we were thinking about in terms of the trade market. There were a ton of them on the open market. Aaron Nola, obviously, Ohtani at the top, Yamamoto at the top, Stroman and guys like that in the middle, Sonny Gray on the short-term deals. But here's Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery on the free agent market still. But the 3 guys on the trade market were Tyler Glasnow, Dylan Cease, and Corbin Burnes. 2 of those guys have been traded, and it sounds like maybe that third guy, maybe he may not get moved until the deadline. It's time. Like Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery, there's really not a whole lot left. Teams don't really have a whole lot of leverage left. The players are starting to run out of leverage. It's a very, very interesting situation. But with Burnes being moved now, if you're a club out there looking for impact starting pitching, you're kind of down to Cease and Snell and Montgomery at this point. And, from a team standpoint, Joe, let me ask it to you this way. how do you view this stalemate from a team standpoint on Blake Snell specifically? Because I think the conversations between Montgomery and Snell are quite different. Why hasn't a team stepped up and paid Blake Snell? And to be honest with you, just to preface that a little bit, I'm not really talking about, well, we don't really know. Like we've talked about like Blake Snell. We know he's not the Cy Young guy every year, but there's still a market value on him that no team seems to have come even remotely close to, unless you believe he's only $100 million pitcher. And I got to be honest with you, I call hogwash on that. If Robbie Ray can get $110, $115 million in the market 2 years ago, Blake Snell should be able to get at least 130 in this year's market. That's where I stand. So if you're a team, what is it? What's the hang up here?
I mean, do you think it is the player or do you think it's the agent? There's one common thread with all these free agents that are left. Scott Boras.
Yeah.
And Scott Boras has fumbled the bag. I mean, Carlos Correa should be a $250 million like human being. Like he should be on a $250 million contract. And that didn't happen. Cody Bellinger, while the 1 year prove it deal with Chicago went well for him, he still got a 1 year deal as a 27-year-old outfielder with a plus. So my point is, like, Scott Boras, while Scott Boras can do, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager type things, and he can do Kumar Rocker and Brock Porter type things, package deals, be a really creative guy that runs a draft room, runs a front office. He's out of options, man. Like he's out of leverage. He's out of a bidding war. So I think it's just a matter of Scott Boras and all of his clients waited too long. But my question for you is, where do these guys go?
Does it seem to you they shot too high early? Does it seem to maybe with Snell that they shot too high? Because if you told me at the beginning of the offseason, Aaron Nola is going to get out. Don't tell me where he goes. It doesn't matter. Aaron Nola is going to get about $175 for 7 years. I would be like, all right, well then Snell, he's got to get at least 150, 160. He could even get 180. That's what I would have said. He outperformed Aaron Nola at age 30 in 2023, won the Cy Young, was the best pitcher in the league. I would have thought he'd be able to at least get, within 10 or 15% of Aaron Nola. And now it seems like that's a pipe dream. And that's weird to me. I don't know that it's a Boras thing. Maybe it is. That's just, if I'm a team though, like I still want Blake Snell on my team, right? Like and I know the Mets are probably done, but it's like, if I'm the Mets, if I'm, the Dodgers are probably out, having added a couple of guys already, but if I'm the Giants, I still want Blake Snell. Why haven't I just given him the 130 or whatever? So there's got to be a reason. So the reason is either the player and the agent are asking for $40 million more than that or more, or too many years times too much AAV. So everything's out of whack. Or the player, and this is what I was told, and I think I mentioned this to you a week or two ago, Blake Snell is being very careful about the team he chooses. Very careful. And I don't know that it's about, I don't know exactly what it's about. I don't know that it's about wants to make sure he goes somewhere that has a chance to win. I don't know that that's it. Wants to make sure that he goes somewhere, certain weather or certain part of the country. He's from the Seattle area or somewhere that he's familiar with, or somewhere where he believes in the, the pitching coach. I don't know what those factors are, but that he's being very, very careful. When you go and gather buzz on Blake Snell, you will find the Giants, the Yankees, and the Angels as the most mentioned. Now, the most mentioned doesn't really mean anything, but those are the teams that keep coming up. There are two other teams and maybe a third that also kind of sort of keep coming up, just not as often. One of them is the Phillies, Joe, continue to get mentioned for Blake Snell, which is really interesting because they have Wheeler, they have Painter and Mick Abel coming, and they just brought back Aaron Nola. Adding Blake Snell to that roster in Philadelphia would be a lot of fun for those Phillies fans. I would love to see that as well. And the Blue Jays are the other one, which is another interesting. They already have a pretty decent rotation. They just signed Justin Turner to kind of shore up their lineup, but Blake Snell in Toronto is interesting too. Let me throw another one at you, and this is one close to home for the both of us. We've talked about how out of whack, out of reach, unrealistic it seems for Blake Snell to sign with his hometown Mariners team. But I got to tell you, the way people keep bringing this up, there might actually be something to it. Like both sides are trying to make it happen. We're running out of time a little bit, and it does sound strange considering the payroll freeze placed by ownership on the Seattle Mariners in November. But I'd say there's been at least 3, maybe 4 different people that have told me, well, this is a thing. Like this is a thing. Like they're trying to figure out ways to make this happen. I've dismissed it up to now, and maybe I shouldn't be, and it's certainly still unlikely, but there may be something to it. So maybe Snell's hanging out, kind of waiting around for the right deal, and maybe he's waiting to make sure that his hometown team isn't the one that's going to be able to give him the deal he wants. I mean, I got my palms up right now because that's how far we're reaching at this point.
Jason, our audience. This is going to be an issue.
Why is this going to be an issue?
This is gonna get some play. But anyways, I think you're right.
I don't know what to tell you, man. There are people out there that say it's getting done.
There's no reason that Blake Snell should still be on the market. And I'll throw one other aspect at you, like because he didn't sign in December or November before the holidays, and because he's still on the market through January, we're now at the point where I think teams have had ample enough opportunity to kind of poke holes and circle red flags and say, we could give him this, but what about the Walker? Like, what about this? He can no longer really be compared to other options with the exception of Jordan Montgomery. And so all of a sudden those red flags and concerns, they kind of, they rear their head a little bit louder than they would have otherwise. So yeah, listen, would Seattle be interested in Blake Snell at 3 years and $54 million just because he wants to play at home and he gets $18 million a year for 3? Like, yes. And is that probably low? Yes. But my point is, I think Blake Snell, I get the feeling Blake Snell is going to take a deal. He's going to be the guy that takes the deal that shocks everyone this year. There's always a guy that's like, whoa, that came in way under bait. Like, I think he's going to be the one that comes in under his key. Maybe it's 4 years and $75 million, whatever. But let me throw one more team at you before we kind of move on here. Seattle just makes a deal with Minnesota. Minnesota obviously needs pitching. I think that's abundantly clear. They apparently shored up $7 million, $8 million in payroll space. Is it possible that Minnesota, they swept in for Carlos Correa. Is it possible Minnesota comes in with a 4-year, $85 million option for Blake Snell and surprises everyone? It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, when you project that rotation right now, what is it? Pablo Lopez, Joe Ryan, and Bailey Ober? Like, I don't think they have anything else that they know is going to be healthy to start the year. Maeda's gone. Sonny Gray is gone. So they certainly need someone. That's a good pull right there. The thing with Snell and his contract, though, it's like at the end of the day, as long as you still have the Giants and they're serious, the Yankees and they're serious, the Angels and they're serious, and the Phillies and the Blue Jays on the outside, the fringe of this, like you still have a chance to get the deal that you kind of wanted or that was right in the first place. Like not necessarily $200 million. I saw somebody the other day saying, what does Blake Snell want? $275 million? Well, I do. Don't you? Don't you want $275 million? Of course. But what did they think was realistic when the offseason started? I don't know. It's got maybe $200 million, right? And that may be gone. But it still seems to me that when you have those teams engaged, you could still get $130 million. You could still get $140 million. And I still think 5 and 130 is a good deal on Blake Snell. I also look at it this way. We can bring Jordan Montgomery into this conversation too, really quick. Jordan Montgomery is reliable. Okay. He's not the game to game, consistent, dominant performer that at times in his career, Blake Snell is, just like last year, just like 5 years ago, 2018, 2019, whenever it was when he won the Cy Young the first time and was a 4+ win pitcher. Jordan Montgomery's different. He's reliable. He's going to give you 180 plus innings pretty much every year. He's been healthy, throws strikes, and he's peaking right now in his career. Unlike Corbin Burnes, Montgomery is heading north. I look at what Eduardo Rodriguez got, Joe, from the Arizona Diamondbacks, 4 and 80 for a guy who's not as good as Blake Snell and he's not as good as Jordan Montgomery. He's a little bit of Montgomery and a little bit of snub. He's not as good as either guy at either thing. So if he can get 4-80 from the Diamondbacks, the floor on Montgomery should be 5-100. So how do we get to the point where Blake Snell, to go to the team that he kind of wants to, has to take 4-75? You know what I mean? It's just weird how we've got, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong because maybe he just wants to play for a certain team in a certain situation really, really bad. But how did this happen? This is really, really, and I'm the guy that was really low. If you asked me before the free agency started, I would have said the two guys that I think are overrated in this market are Blake Snell and Matt Chapman. And I still think at this point, if Snell doesn't get at least $100 million, something really bad happened, and I don't like it. And I don't think it fits, and I don't think it's right.
Well, I think for that to happen, it has to have been on Blake Snell or Scott Boras. I mean, if Scott Boras is holding the cards this long. Mm-hmm. I mean, this long. He is caught. Like, Blake Snell should have been off the market before Marcus Stroman. There's so many more red flags with Marcus Stroman in terms of, what the second half looked like for him last year. A back injury. He got $20 million a year. Like, Blake Snell should be off the market. This, you alluded to this at the beginning. This screams Blake Snell is holding out. Is holding out hope. He's holding out the idea that his hometown team is going to come in with a late last-ditch effort. They're trying to make it work. He's been so public about his admiration for the city. I personally found it strange, and I think I texted this to you. I found it strange that he raised the 12th man flag for a Seahawks game, and he was highlighted at a Seattle Kraken game. And he talks so much about the Mariners, specifically the Mariners, on his Twitch channel.
Right.
It just feels to me like well, it just feels to me like he has tried to force this thing to happen so badly. And I will say this, and I know we've kind of hit on this all winter. If Blake Snell is truly willing to come to Seattle on a considerable discount, and that ownership group isn't willing to move some pieces around to bring home a hometown guy who has been a good representation of the city and the sport, that's a huge missed opportunity. Because what's the one thing that Seattle has struggled with over the years in free agency? It's just free agency, Jason.
Yeah,
it's the idea of free agency. Yeah. So here's here's the thing, premium guy that wants to be here,
they don't need him on a discount, though. That's the thing. They don't need him on a discount. They just need a deal that's just long enough for them to manipulate, like the short-term salary. Because if they're going to have restrictions that it appears they're going to have in Seattle this year, which is give or take 140, 145, we don't know exactly what the numbers. We're all guessing. Jerry DiPoto keeps saying it's going to be higher than it was a year ago, and it was about $140 million a year ago. So if it's higher than a year ago, they have 10 million more to go, but maybe that means they can go to 145. That just means that in the first year of a deal, Blake Snell's salary would be significantly lower, and you'd have to make it up to him on the back end. That Robbie Ray deal, Joe, that brought back Mitch Haniger, which impacts this year. You didn't save a bunch of money this year. It was basically a wash this year, but shedding that Robbie Ray contract for a couple of years after 2024 is going to help their payroll flexibility moving forward, almost no matter what the ownership is going to do. If you told me Blake Snell was going to cost $5 and $130, I would tell you, all right, cool. I can make that work under this year's budget. I can make that work because I know I can make it work for next year, the year after, and the year after that. I don't need the significant discount. You know what I mean? To make it fit, I don't need it.
You could backload it pretty hard.
Absolutely, you could. Like, he can make $10 or $12 million in year one, and then just go 28, 30, 32. You absolutely can make that work. And about the time that he starts making, the bigger money, even Luis Castillo's deal is going to start coming off the books. I think you can do it. I don't think it's happening, but maybe that is what Blake Snell's waiting for. If you had to bet, though, let's move on from Blake Snell. If you had to bet, where does Blake Snell end up?
San Francisco.
Yeah, I think that's the next best bet for him. Yeah, I think that if you're Blake Snell, they're a team that has a chance. They're trying to win. They want to win. They want to spend. I think you can get a pretty good deal there. If Blake Snell goes to San Francisco, where does Jordan Montgomery go? And then I have one more pitching question for you, and then we'll move on to some draft stuff.
I just, the
it's
Rangers
tough to find a match,
TV,
isn't it?
Well, I mean, the Rangers TV situation seems to be ironing itself out. Like it seems
Mhm.
to be getting to the point where it's cut and dry. The ink is figured out. I think he goes to Texas. I think maybe
Yeah,
that's the reason that Jordan Montgomery is still on the board is he's waiting for that the Diamond Valley thing to figure itself
mhm.
out, get, you
Sure.
know, get approval from ownership, and then they sign him. They need
Sure.
him, man. Listen, they need him.
They
And
do. They
we're not
do.
talking about we're not talking about this week, but I will say as an unbiased Mariners fan, the Corey Seager thing should really, really concern the Rangers. Big time.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yep. He's the
That is
guy who's
not
been banged up and now he's gonna
Oh,
miss a
I'm
little
not even
time,
talking
isn't he?
about that. Yeah, he's porcelain. I'm not talking about that. That injury has that is one of the it's just like an oblique. Like that is an injury that takes 3 months to heal, but it takes 6 months to get right. And if you rush it, there
Mhm.
is rupture, there is tearing. Like, I mean, shoot, we've seen it the last couple years in Seattle. Mitch Haniger missed an immense amount of time with adductor issues. Dylan
Mhm.
Moore missed the better part of the exact same injury happened with Dylan Moore, and he didn't play until like June,
And
July,
then he wasn't the
and then
same until
and then he didn't have his
August. Yeah.
reps.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Seager's
I would be
29 years
concerned.
old. They're calling it a sports hernia, but it's one of those core issues that Joe's alluding to that can cause problems. And he's a guy who gets banged up, and sometimes that's just the way things go. Yeah, they should be worried about that. When you look at the Rangers pitching staff, DeGrom is going to miss at least half the season. I don't know where that's going to go. Max Scherzer looks like he's going to miss at least half the season. Have no idea where that's going to go or how well those guys are going to. I question Scherzer even when he's healthy, his value. I think if DeGrom is healthy, every pitch he throws is electric. But right now that rotation looks like Eovaldi, John Gray, Dane Dunning, Andrew Haney, and Tyler Mahle, which isn't terrible,
No,
but it
Mally's out
is
too.
missing. But it's missing the. Oh, that's right, Mally's out too. But it's missing the impact um, that DeGrom was supposed to bring you, that theoretically Scherzer's supposed to bring you. And it seems like, I don't know, is Snell a place that that the Rangers would go? And is Texas a place that Blake Snell would go? Because maybe that makes just as much or more sense as Jordan Montgomery. Yeah, that'd be really, really interesting. Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell still free agents here in February. It's just weird. I will say this: the Giants did trade Ross Stripling on Friday and have one roster spot available. Could mean nothing. Could be something entirely different, but it also could be we're ready to sign somebody, and maybe that guy is Blake Snell. So we'll see. All right, Joe. I did the count, buddy. I pulled out a calendar, like a physical calendar too, like it's
Oh, where'd you get one of
1987.
those?
Yeah, I know, right? So there's one Office Depot left in the world, and I found it, and I went there, and I got this real calendar, and I held it up, and I counted all the days till the 2024 MLB draft. 163 days away to the draft. Now you knew that because your brain just like keeps track of that shit. You knew when the 2024 draft was going to be to the minute, way back in like 2018 before we even knew it was going to be in Texas, before we even knew the time zone it was going to be in. I get it, but I had to count these things. 163 days, but it's never too soon to dive into the talent here. This class is really, really interesting to me. And to me, it's as interesting as last year's class. It's not as good necessarily, but it's as interesting because of the way that it might shape out. You could get the first 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 picks could be college players, and 6, 7, 8 of them could be hitters. That to me is interesting enough. But then it flips. Then all of a sudden, there's a lot of prep guys that seem to fit in that mix, and we're a couple of months away. But I just find it fascinating. And another thing I find fascinating, Joe, is, and this isn't just public boards such as your own, but scouts and clubs tend to kind of do the same thing. A player's standing at the end of the spring, at the end of the college season, at the end of the summer, for example, isn't static. It changes between September and now. Players on your board have changed. You have them ranked differently, maybe some of them significantly differently between February now as you're projecting forward on your next board from the last time you made an update, which I believe was September. It's amazing how that happens because no games are played. This is really just fall ball and workouts and training sessions and things of that nature. So maybe pull a couple of those names, that are most interesting to you that maybe have jumped the most between, I guess it would be September, the last time that you made an update, and now. Are there a couple of guys that stand out to you that have jumped quite a bit? And then maybe tell us why that player has jumped, like what's gone into that process to jump as far as they did.
Well, if anybody listening to this podcast listens to Overslot, you'll be very familiar with this name. Harvard Westlake righty Duncan Marston. He's pitching tomorrow. I'm hoping to go see him before Area Code Select West. He's a 6'3" pitching Saturday, right? Sorry. Against Jay Sarah. Harvard Westlake righty, 6'3", 200 pounds. LA native. He's committed to Wake Forest. This is a guy that was around the 200 range for me. And the reason is his sophomore year, actually his freshman year. No, his sophomore year of high school, TJ. So doesn't pitch as a sophomore. His junior year, still recovering from TJ, still kind of on the mend with some other small ailments, doesn't pitch as a junior. And on top of all this, he's committed to Stanford. So in October, he's finally back on the mound. And he decommits from Stanford, commits to Wake Forest. For those of you listening, if you're committed to Stanford, those guys don't get poached in the draft. They go to school. Wake Forest, okay, it opens up his signability a little bit. This kid comes out 6'3", 200 pounds, touching 100 as a high schooler with an 84-mile-an-hour slider that has enormous two-plane tilt. Now, scouts want to see if the strikes are quality. They want to see him pitch 80 pitches. Right now, he's just about 50 pitches at a time. He'll go 50 or 60 tomorrow on Saturday. That is the quintessential winter jump. Like, hey, this is a guy that hadn't pitched as a sophomore, hadn't pitched as a junior. He's back touching triple digits. And ironically,
so it's kind of a combination of health and the stuff is jumping.
And the stuff.
It
doesn't hurt that his teammate is Bryce Rayner, who is the other right-handed high schooler in the country throwing 98. I can't imagine facing that pitching rotation on a weekend series. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being a 16-year-old kid who is still taking his lunch to work in a plastic box, eating a Twinkie, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, just hoping to have energy at 4:30, and you got to face 98 on back-to-back nights?
I mean, I can imagine it. It just doesn't feel very good.
I wouldn't,
you know what I mean?
I wouldn't, I would have a stomach ache that weekend, I think.
Yeah. So that's Duncan Marston, who is ranked in the 220s, 6'3", 200. That's the LA area, Harvard Westlake, and he's a Wake Forest commit now. So that report, his entire scouting report has changed.
I mean, entirely.
He was low to mid 90s before, and now he was touching 100.
In the fall, he was 3 to 5, 2 to 4, 3 to 5, which was really, for a guy that hadn't pitched, it was like, oh, this is a pretty good pop-up arm on the West Coast. And now that he's gotten stronger and getting his reps under him, the dude has tickled 100 from a really, and this is important, it's a really loose, easy operation. There's not a lot of effort behind it. And so, he went from a guy that was on people's radars quite literally to being, he might be the first high school pitcher off the board.
Let me ask you this.
That fast.
Just based on stuff, ignore the injury and the missed time. Based on the stuff that he showed prior to this fall, is that a top 80 guy, top 100 guy? Because obviously you had him ranked, in the 200s, largely because he had the Tommy John surgery thing, and you got to see it come back. You got to see some command come back. You obviously got to see the arm strength come back, the durability, the endurance within games to go 70, 80, 90 pitches, whatever it is. You got to see that. But if that's not there, if that concern's not there, just using the stuff, is he a top 60 guy? Is he a top 100 guy? Like, where would he have fit if injury wasn't part of it?
If he was 3 to 4, 3 to 5 with that breaking ball, he would fit somewhere in the 75 to 125 range. Like, it's a loose arm. It's a good operation. I don't think, I'll put it this way. Like, if he was 3 to 4 and nothing changed, I don't think he would get signed. And the reason is some of the bumps and bruises he's had, plus the Tommy John already in the rearview mirror, plus the commitment to Wake Forest. I just don't think anybody would scrap up $2.5 million to pay him away from that commitment. But now that it's, you get to the point where it's like, this is unquestionable. Like he's touching 100 and it's easy. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, I mean, the narrative has literally changed from, are we comfortable giving this kid 5? Are we comfortable giving this kid 3.5? Like, what is the number with so many pockmarks in his rearview mirror? He's going to be a fascinating guy to watch as we approach July.
And he gets underway Saturday. A lot of fun, interesting. I imagine you'll have updates from his outing at some point over the weekend or early next week. Who else on your list has made the big jump?
Yeah, I'm going to go with one more pitcher. And this is a guy that spent the last 2 years at UCLA. He was a very highly recruited high school pitcher. But again, Tommy John, 6-foot lefty, 200 pounds, gauge jump. He's at LSU now. A lot of you probably know the name. He was a top 50 guy for me in 2021. But he's battled through injuries. He had nagging injuries in 2022. Tommy John in 2023. Not the biggest guy, but he transfers to LSU this fall under Jay Johnson. And as an industry, we go in and we look at that roster and we say, okay, Chancey's the Sunday guy, probably gets Tuesday starts. We'll see how he bounces back from TJ. This is a big year for him. Well, all of a sudden, like, Gage Jump is projected to possibly be their Friday night starter, which is the guy. It's the guy at LSU. Huge metric stuff, a fastball with elite level carry characteristics. It's an easy operation, a low slot, big curveball, sweeping slider, a changeup that's really come along. I mean, I think the biggest thing with Gage, looking at his draft profile, is TJ's in the rearview mirror and he's kind of an undersized lefty. He's only 6 feet tall. So
sure.
I don't have it pulled up. You might have it pulled up. I'm not sure where he was on the last.
Yeah,
update,
you had him at.
He will be.
You had him at 117.
Yeah, so he'll jump about 40 or 50 spots inside the top 80, inside the top 75, top 80. He looks like a guy that is going to go in the second round or comp B at this point. He could jump even a little bit higher than that if he dominates the SEC.
Yeah, well, a chance to be the Friday guy is impressive because it's not like LSU produces pitching or even has any pitching this year, right? Like, there's nothing. I'm obviously joking.
No.
They don't have anything there, right? Like Luke Holman's not there. Thatcher Hurd is not there.
No, they
don't have any talent on
Paul
that team.
Skeens wasn't any good.
Like only. Speaking of guys that probably sees the big leagues this year, we're going to get to that here in a minute too on the way out. Interesting. Are there any hitters on your list that made a big jump that are worth mentioning?
The hitters are a little bit different. As I look at my list, the guy, listen, I'm going to podcast about this. Actually, I'll save that for the podcast. Let me see. A guy that has jumped a little bit that's a hitter. I think a guy that I continue to get rave reviews on from the industry. I don't think I was this high on him about 4 months ago, but he'll be in the top 45. On my next board is Kansas State infielder Kalen Culpepper. 6 foot, 190. He's going to play shortstop this year at Kansas State. He was the third baseman last year. Again, don't know where he was on my last board, but just a guy that seems to do everything pretty well. Where was he?
53.
Okay,
53.
So yeah, he's going to jump about 10 spots, which is a lot. With no baseball going on.
Yeah, what's the why? Why is he moving up? Like, what's the piece of
Yeah.
information or the pieces of information that that have him moving up? Or maybe it's other guys moving down or a combination of.
Couple of things. So August and September, he was the best bat, maybe the second best bat for Team USA, which is a huge
Mhm.
accomplishment considering all the rest of the talent that's around him. He's put on some good weight. The fact that he's going to play shortstop speaks volumes to where not only Kansas State but scouts think his athleticism is. And this is a class that doesn't really have a lot of quality college shortstops. Like the first ones that you're going to find are like Culpepper and Anthony
Mhm.
Silva at TCU. They're probably not going to be top 25 picks. But in a class that's just generally missing college shortstops and floor up the middle on the college side, I think Culpepper and Silva both represent that.
Yeah, interesting. Kansas State, obviously, considering their conference, they do have a weekend series in late March against Texas, so they'll face some quality arms there, not necessarily any first round picks or anything. So that's interesting, and they'll obviously play Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. As well as TCU, so there will be some pretty good West Virginia, some pretty good competition for Culpepper playing in the Big 12. Interesting. And he's going to play shortstop. That's always interesting when a guy goes from second base or third base to shortstop, because you wonder, well, is this the actual position they should have been at? Or is it like, well, he's our best shot? Because colleges are trying to win games and those coaches aren't necessarily making decisions on positions based on, we're going to help your draft stock. It's like, well, you're our best shot to play shortstop. So can you see Culpepper actually sticking at shortstop? Is that actually a thing, or is this he's just going to play short this year, and he's probably more of a second or third baseman?
I don't think I can really answer that, to be totally honest with you, Jason. I haven't
Mhm,
watched him play up the middle. I've seen him play third base. He's got more than
mhm.
enough arm strength to play on the left side of the infield. He's only 6 feet tall. He's a bigger, thicker, muscular kid. So I don't know whether or not that's going to translate to the six. But I'm willing to give it a shot. We're willing to give JJ Weatherhold a shot. I'm willing to give this a shot.
Yeah, interesting. Uh, who would have thought 20 years ago that the Big 10 and the Big 12, deep in the Big 12 too, not just at the top of the Big 12, but deep into the Big 12, um, they're putting up big time baseball prospects in those conferences. Like over the years,
No.
Big 12 more so than the Big 10, but man, 20 years ago, it just wasn't happening that much, particularly in the Big 10, and now it doesn't surprise anybody when that happens. So, hey, how about the teams in the North doing a little something? All right, at futurestarseries.com right now, there's an insightful piece of yours, Joe. I thought fastball killers, fastball murderers. Here are the players in the class who have the data that suggests they kill fastballs. Reminds me of a funny story that I'll tell another day. It's a fun set of numbers, though. Maybe give us a synopsis of that piece a little bit, and maybe a name or two that stand out, and maybe follow it up with like, how big of a deal is this particular metric? It's a simple metric, and
Mhm.
I think we can glean something from it. But what is that? Like, how do you take this once you see those numbers heading into the 2024 season?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of led with this in the piece. I think the fastball is like a gatekeeper into professional baseball for both sides. Like, in order to be a high pick, in order to be a starting pitcher, in order to gain the trust of scouts as a pitcher, you have to miss bats with your fastball. Your fastball has to perform, because it's really difficult to navigate a path toward being a productive big league pitcher with a fastball that doesn't have any teeth, that doesn't do any damage.
Mhm.
The same exists for hitters. While Major League Baseball, professional baseball continues to push further and further toward, more and more breaking balls. I think 2022 is the first year ever that less than 50% of the pitches thrown were fastballs, dipped under 50%. And it went even lower last year. While that continues to be a trend, you still, like, in order to get to that point, you still have to be able to hit a fastball. If you're a hitter that they can throw 95 under your hands and you can't hit it, you're never going to get past double A. It's a gatekeeper metric. to the big leagues, at least in my opinion. You got to have fast hands. You got to have a quick bat. So I wanted to write an article detailing guys that not only made a ton of contact with fastballs, but they did damage on fastballs, and they just generally are prepared for what I would consider like level 1 in professional baseball. Do you want me to go into the guys, or do you have any specific questions?
Yeah, actually, I do want to go into guy. Maybe toss us the top couple of guys, but I think the key thing, and I'll just reiterate what you just said, so everybody can follow along. This isn't just who hit the fastball the most, or who got hits on the fastball the most necessarily. This is um, how often they swung and missed at the fastball, correct? And
Mm-hmm.
the contact percentage on what we would probably say average or above average fastballs. And I think you cut it off at 92 miles an hour, legitimate fastball from a velocity standpoint. I think that's important. It's not, again, it's not just one thing. It's not just, well, this guy hit, 380 against fastballs. There's a combination here and some information that matters. And I think as you think about these players, remember this is about whiff rate on the fastball and the contact rate on 92 plus with exit velocities and all that good stuff. But check out the piece, fastball murderers, which is just one of my favorite words on a baseball website.
Fastball
But yeah,
murderers.
who stood out? Like who stood out? And there's two categories there, I think, for you to talk about, at least two. Who stood out in those categories, and maybe was there someone who kind of did both?
Yeah, so there's going to be a whole host, a huge amount of players in college baseball that can make contact with 92, like 92 miles an hour or faster. Though there's not a lack of those players, but it's finding the players that actually do damage on the fastball that I think leads to like projecting out future success. So,
Sure.
like for example, a guy that I wrote about, Tommy White. Tommy White is a guy that made contact about 84% of the time against fastballs over 92 miles an hour. That's above average. It's not like spectacular, but for a guy that had exit velos in excess of 112, 113 miles an hour, that's a pretty good combo. Charlie Condon ranked very, very high. The Georgia first baseman and outfielder, 80% contact rate against fastballs, but also, hit a ball, hit his 90th percentile exit velo at 110. So that's a good combo. There's also the flip side of that, where it's like, okay, Dakota Jordan is one of the most fascinating players in the 2024 class. Outfielder, made contact with 84% of fastballs over 92. That's really good. Had a max exit velo of 119. That's really good. Had a 90th percentile exit velo of 113. That's very good. I mean, that's hitting the ball as hard as Jack Caglione, who most considered to be the best slugger. But the interesting thing about Dakota Jordan is while he ranks so high in all of these, he has like a 66% overall contact rate in college baseball. So, like, this is a guy that even though he's high on draft boards, I'd be surprised if he got anything but breaking balls all season because he struggled so much against everything that wasn't velocity. So if you go and look at the piece at futurestarseries.com, you'll see Dakota Jordan is in an area of the chart he's totally alone. Totally alone.
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
Um,
he is all by his lonesome out there. Yeah.
all by his
Dakota
lonesome.
Jordan, Mississippi State outfielder, 6 feet, 215, right-handed hitter, right-handed thrower. On your September update, you had him at 28. So at least a guy that's kind of fringe top 50 at the very least, at least as of September. Be interesting to see where you have him on your next update. Is there, I don't know if you did this, but I'm kind of thinking about this backwards. Are there guys that are names for this class from the college perspective that struggled with this sort of thing, that didn't make the contact, that were especially low or alarmingly low in their contact rates or their failure to put up big exit velocities against 92 plus?
Yeah, I think the guy that I'll just point out one because he's the name that everyone's going to know. I think the one that really comes to mind for me is Travis Bazzana.
Mhm.
All of his metrics, and I think we talked about this maybe 2 weeks ago on this podcast. All of his metrics are off the chart, but
Mhm.
he only made contact with about 80% of fastballs that he swung at over 92 miles an hour. So that's pretty like middle of the road. Like not
Mhm.
good, not bad. But for a guy like Bazana who doesn't have a particularly significant like raw power tool, it's
Mhm.
going to be an area of his game in 2024 that I think needs to improve. If he can't handle the fastball better than an average college baseball player, and he doesn't provide you plus raw power, that's going to be not a red flag, but it's going to be something that scouts circle as this could be a reason that he could struggle at the next level.
Mm. And Oregon State, they obviously play a pretty good schedule in the Pac-12 and in non-con. So he's going to get the opportunity to face legitimate arms in that conference all year and in any of their early season non-conference. Be really interesting to see how that turns out and see what these numbers look like at the end of the year. So, if I'm reading this, I'm like, all right, this is cool. These guys are pretty good at it. Maybe these guys really aren't. Bazana, you kind of want to see more out of him if he's going to be a top 5 pick. But Joe, fastball is just one pitch. What about sliders and curveballs?
Well, that's a great point. Yeah. So next week, I mean, maybe I'll put it out on Saturday. Maybe I'll put it out on Sunday. I'll put out guys that murder breaking balls. I want to see,
Beautiful.
even if you can't hit the fastball, can you crush spin?
Mhm.
Because as I prefaced, like slider usage is only going up. It hit its highest
Mhm.
mark over like 23% last year. So I want to highlight the guys that, maybe their hands can speed up a little bit and get to velocity as they get stronger, but they've already got great eyes and feel for spin. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Travis Bazana will be very well represented on that piece. It's certainly one of the strengths of his game. And I think the names that you see at the top of that piece, that article, most of them will seem like familiar names you've seen before.
Fun. That's fun. Can you
Yeah.
can you do change ups too? Can you do like what like this is amazing. Like that's the first thing I think. All right, well, if Bazana doesn't crush the fastball, but he's okay, does he absolutely light up break 'em all? It sounds like maybe he does. I'm thinking about
Yeah.
everything, like this is great.
I could
So
certainly like here's the thing about changeups in college though, like there's two types of
they're not
changeup they're either really not competitive pitches at all or they're just parachutes right down the middle of the plate. So
there's probably also not a
um
lot of them thrown, but
less
like
reliable. Not a lot of good
yeah,
ones.
absolutely. Absolutely. Looking forward to the breaking ball murderers.
Yeah. Spin
Let's keep
murderers.
using it. Not killers,
Spin
not
killers.
killers.
Spin
Not
killers.
crushers. Yeah, they're
No.
I mean, you call it what you want, but I love the word murder. Uh,
Love the word
good stuff.
murder. Yeah, that's gonna be a
Uh,
drop.
yes, love the word murder. It's beautiful. In addition to Joe's draft board updates that are coming up at futurestarseries.com, I can confirm that he's filed his team top 30. So we'll start pushing those out in about a week and a half or so. And I'll also come at some point on the end of that with a preseason top 100 prospect ranking, which is going to be really interesting. I've been working the text machine because as I put together the posts for the website, Joe, I'm trying to find interesting insights on players that I can add, just a line or two for maybe one player per team. And to add to those posts. So look for that. But I wanted to close out with a quick back and forth here, and later this month maybe we'll dig into this a little bit deeper. Last year's draft picks, like we expect to see a few of those top draft picks in the big leagues this year, or at least they have a chance, like the Wyatt Langfords and the Dylan Cruz and the Paul Skeens. Those are probably the top 3 easily. But I talked to the Reds recently, and maybe you have too, and you got the same thing. And I got the very strong impression that number 38 overall pick Ty Floyd is a guy that organization believes has a real chance late in the year as a starter to see the big leagues. I could not believe that I had heard that. And they didn't say those words exactly, but it's like, yeah, he's that kind of guy. Like we expect big things from him, and we wouldn't be surprised if he hits the big leagues in 2024. I was surprised by it because we're talking, it wasn't Rhett Lauder, the Reds' number 7 overall pick. It was Floyd.
Yeah.
If you tell me Floyd in relief, I'm like, yeah, he could pitch in relief right now at the big league level. They were talking about Floyd as a starter. He just kind of struck me as a guy who, there's some things to work on. Like you build on that fastball and, pretty decent wrinkle with that slider. And then, you just do what you got to do. And he's got a curveball in there too. Didn't pitch last summer. So I'm just like,
Nope.
Really? Like this is remarkable, but it got me thinking, other than those top 3 names, are there other names in that 2023 draft where you might drop, a wager that they see the big leagues in 2024 in some capacity at some point before the end of the year, other than the Cruz, Langford, Skeens trio?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few, honestly. I think Matt Shaw with the Cubs could see the big leagues if they need an infusion. And I mean, he got up to Double-A, and he crushed the ball. Brock Wilken, who I mentioned earlier in this podcast with the Brewers, like they're gonna have room for him. They're gonna have room for him, and he produced, and he was one of the guys that in the draft it was like the hit tool, despite being so big, he's like 6'4", 230, despite being so big and like appearing to have that slugger archetype, incredibly polished and patient at the plate. The only question with him is like, is he going to play third base? So Brock Wilken, I think, could see the big leagues. And the one that I think is going to see the big leagues is Hurston Waldrop with the Braves. 2 years in a row, we've asked, do the Braves have enough bullets in that rotation, in that bullpen to raise a title, raise a trophy? And Waldrop absolutely annihilated in his debut last year. And the biggest thing with him was always going to be like sequencing and strike quality. But, there's a potential there for 3+ pitches. I think Waldrop actually sees the big leagues. Yeah, he could see the big leagues before the 2024 draft even rolls around.
Right. Another guy that reached Double-A, that was a fairly high pick. He was a first rounder, Kyle Teal with Boston. He only got 39 plate appearances in Double-A, but he absolutely raked in the complex league, raked in high A, raked in Double-A. Maybe the idea that he's catching slows him down and he doesn't get to the big leagues in 2024. But from an offensive standpoint, he put up the kind of numbers that would give you some confidence that maybe he could poke his way through. So that'd be another guy to throw in there. I don't know where Tommy Troy really is. The numbers aren't great. And I think the same thing with the two Jacobs, the two infielders out, Jacob Wilson, Jacob Gonzalez. They both did some things, last year that, suggest polish and things like that. And I know Wilson hit pretty well in high A, but and Nolan Shanuel already made his debut from the class. Yep. We had some fun with that last year. So I imagine, he's probably the opening day first baseman for the Angels. Let me throw out a little bit of a dark horse, and a true dark horse. How about Cole Carrig? If they move him out from behind the plate, how about Cole Carrig late in the year, shoving his way, getting to Double-A in July, early August, and getting to Colorado for a couple of weeks in September? I mean, that guy raked at San Diego State, absolutely raked in the minors last year. Talk about a guy who murders fastballs. I don't know, just seemed to be a guy that like might surprise us a little bit, college guy, can certainly hit. I don't know. I just thought Cole Carrig was an interesting one to kind of throw in there as a long shot.
Yeah, I could see it. Colorado did work with him immediately when he arrived on making a little bit of a swing change. And because of that, I generally throw a little bit of pause. Like they want to get him just into that muscle memory before they expose him to like 90-mile-an-hour sliders. So it's possible. I would love to see that kid in a super utility role at the big league level playing catcher sometimes. That would be such a fun profile to root for at the big league level. And he's a great guy. I interviewed Cole before the draft. I'll throw one more at you just because it's another guy that it's like, it wasn't great in college, but it was so good last year. What about Yo-Yo Morales in Washington? What if Yo-Yo comes up with Dylan Cruz? Hit 350.
Yeah.
He hit 350 in his pro debut last year, and the walks weren't like 30 or 36 strikeouts and 166 at bats. Like that's not as alarming as it was at times in college. Yeah.
It's really
He's
good.
a freak athlete too.
He was just over 20% in A ball. He was at exactly 20% in high A, and he was at 12% in his very short stay in double A. That's a good one. You know, when you make adjustments and you see the results, it completely can change the player, it can change his trajectory, could change his ceiling, could change his ETA, and maybe Mraz. That's a really good call there too, because we know he's got the power. What is that, 65 power at least? I mean, that's I'm not sure if he's a third baseman either. Maybe he's just a first baseman, but yeah, if you're the Nationals, maybe
talk about a guy that murders fastballs. Like, he was one of those guys that, like, you talk about like Dakota Jordan, like if it was out of the zone, Morales had a kind of a tough time battling and extending the at bat. But if you left something in the zone for him, I mean, it was crushed. So I'll be interested to see how he handles an extended look at AA or AAA pitching and gets some of those gnarly sliders just off the black, and whether or not he can stick with that. But we talk about after the draft, like guys that impressed, guys that made the most of their pro debuts. I don't think there was a guy that made their pro debut last year that impressed me more than Morales. Like that guy was probably the biggest eye opener of anybody from the draft.
And he was definitely the guy that tackled his perceived weakness with the most success. I can't think of anybody else that went completely. I mean, when you jump into pro ball and you're using the wood bat and you're facing pro pitching, you get to all the way to AA and you strike out less than you did in college. Like that's something. Like that's an accomplishment. That's something. So that's fun.
It really should be celebrated. It was a tremendous debut. I would have thought, I honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if he never made it to high A last year, let alone hitting 290 at AA. Like, just kudos to Yo-Yo. That was tremendous.
Yeah. And power, we're not talking about a bunch of home runs, but he was still hitting the ball hard and hitting the ball in the gap. And we know the home runs. I think he had 16, I think he had 16 doubles and 4 triples in his time in the minors, and 198 plate appearances in 44 games. So even though there are no home runs, completely different hitter he displayed. That's fun. That's fun stuff. Yo-Yo. By the way, if he does that before the draft, he gets taken in the top half of the first round, right? Maybe top 10.
Oh yeah, he would have been a top 20 pick. Yeah,
that's crazy. Good stuff there. Hey, stay tuned at futurestarseries.com. We'll push out those top 30s a little later this month and get as many of those little nuggets as possible. But Joe's rankings are in and we're getting them ready. Hey, we're 2 weeks out, man. Like, I'm feeling the jitters, like the anxiety of not just spring training, but the big time college baseball matchups we're going to see early in the year with some of those early season tournaments in the sunny areas of the country, and some of the cross conference matchups we get from those. I'm absolutely jacked. And now that we know what to look for, hey, can Travis Bazzana just start murdering fastballs so he can get on that list?
If he starts murdering fastballs, I bet Bazzana goes 1. I bet he goes 1.
Yeah, I need him to be a murderer, Travis.
I want to draft a felon.
Exactly, a baseball felon. We're just creating phrases here. I love it. That's another good one. Good stuff. We'll talk next week, man.
All right.
Hey, this has been the FSS Plus podcast.
So just chill till the next episode. Falling back on that ass, what a hellified gangster lean, getting funky on the mic like